Hey there darlings, welcome to the Farmer's Table. My name is Jess. If you are new here, I'm so happy to have you here watching my channel today. And if you're not new here, welcome back. I'm also glad to have you here. Today we're going to be making the easiest bread recipe that I know how to share with you. And you may be wondering, because you're getting a little bit of extra content this week. Yes, I'm posting more videos than usual because I'm doing a lot in the kitchen as we are getting ready for a really big winter storm event to come through the south this coming weekend. And I know there are many of you who are also in the path of that storm. It's a really big one, and we obviously are not made for that here in the south. We don't really have the infrastructure to deal with winter weather, and it can be pretty catastrophic. I mean, even just smaller amounts, but we're in the path that's supposed to get a lot of ice, which means we're probably going to lose power, which means I'm spending the few days before this storm making sure that we have plenty of food that we can eat, that we don't have to have power to prepare. There is kind of a funny thing. I don't know if this is everywhere, but in the south it is most assuredly true that if there is a winter weather forecast, the store is going to have a run on milk, eggs, and bread. And the last couple of days I've started to see a lot of pictures posted on social media from, you know, people across the south showing a picture of their empty bread aisle where it's all sold out, they can't get it. And I kind of had the thought yesterday, man, that would be a bad feeling if you were trying to get prepared and you couldn't get the things you felt like you needed and you didn't know how to make them yourself. Of course, here on our farm, we don't have to go anywhere for our milk, eggs, and bread, and that's a very empowering feeling. And while I can't hook you up with a dairy cow or a flock of chickens, I can absolutely teach you how to make an easy loaf of bread. So this loaf of bread is a no-knead artisan bread. It's very tasty, and more than anything else, it's very affordable to make because you just need flour, salt, water, and yeast. So basic. Of course, you can jazz it up and put additions or herbs and, you know, cinnamon sugar or cheese and jalapenos and all the different ways you can take it. You can totally do that. But for a basic bread loaf that's delicious and filling, it doesn't require a lot. I do have some other videos, a very great sandwich bread recipe that we make regularly. I will put a link to that. I have a laid back sourdough video if you have a sourdough starter and you're looking how to use that in a way that's not overwhelming. I've got a great video on that. And then I have a bread machine bread recipe. So if you've got a bread machine you want to dust off and throw some ingredients in, I will put that video down below as well. But this is something that you can do without a lot of extra equipment. You don't need a mixer, you don't need to knead it. We're just going to put all the ingredients together, and then I'll give you some options of where you can go from there. All right, so I've got my stuff here. This recipe is more or less measurements. When I first started making this is one of the first breads I ever made at home from scratch, probably 15 or so years ago. And it's been shared. I've seen it lots of different places. It's so basic. I'm sure that this recipe is about as old as time because it's flour, yeast, salt, and water, and throwing that together and making a great bread. It's really just in the method. But when I first started, I didn't even own a kitchen scale, so I did this entirely off measurements. Now I'll weigh the ingredients just to kind of make sure I'm getting it pretty exact, but don't feel stressed out about that. In the written recipe, I'll put a link to a printable recipe, so you can print this out and put it in your recipe binder. I will put both measurements and weights, so you can do whichever you prefer. So I'm going to take my bowl here and put it on the scale and tear it out. Oh, first, we want to take half a cup of warm water. Ideally, you want this between like 105 to 110 degrees. I more or less just put my hands under the faucet, and when the water starts feeling like bath water warm, I will use that. You don't want it too hot because it can damage your yeast, and you don't want it too cold because then it won't wake it up. I have right here instant yeast. Let me give you a little note on the yeast. If you are using instant yeast, you can actually skip this step. I'm just doing it for the sake of showing people who it may benefit. And you can just mix your yeast straight into your flour, mix this all together, makes it even easier. If you are using active dry yeast that's not instant or rapid rise, you always want to proof your yeast. Now, it doesn't hurt to proof instant yeast also. It's not going to take anything away from it. And it can be a really good practice if you've got yeast in your cabinet that you don't know how long it's been there, because older yeast is not going to rise your dough. And it's better to find out in this cup that your yeast is dead rather than after you've mixed into a lot of ingredients. So we're going to take 2 teaspoons of yeast and mix it into some warm water and just set that aside so it can get get nice and bubbly and wake up. If in 5 minutes when we're ready to mix this in, if we don't see bubbles in that, we don't want to mix any ingredients in it, because that means it's not gonna rise our dough. Again, if you have active yeast and you know it's fresh, skip this part, just mix all the ingredients together. So in this bowl, on the tiered scale, I'm gonna put 3 cups of flour, which is 450 grams, more or less. Bread flour is ideal here. If you don't have bread flour, you can totally use all-purpose. I think you get a better texture out of bread flour because of the, you know, protein and gluten level. So I like to put my flour in a big container. Even if you're buying a small bag of flour, I feel like putting in a container that you can kind of fluff it up before you measure it out gives you a more accurate reading, because if your flour is packed in your cup, your ratios are going to be off, and that's especially important if you are not using a scale. So I'm going to put in my 3 cups. Yeah, this is going to be really close to 450 grams. Let's see, 449. So see, measurements can work, but you have to do things like make sure your flour is not packed down. And into my flour, my 3 cups of flour, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of salt and mix that together. If you're using rapid rise or instant yeast, you could just go ahead and mix that in the flour at this point. My yeast is already getting good and bubbly, so I'm going to go ahead and toss this in. We need 1.5 cups of very warm water to put in here. So I've already got half that has the yeast in it. I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Make sure you scrape all the yeast out of your cup. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another cup of water to bring my total up to 1.5. And now take this bowl off the scale. Really measuring the weights is not that important. I just am in the habit of doing it because of sourdough. And now we want to mix this together. You don't have to touch it with your hands, just mix it. If it looks like you don't have enough water in there, just give it a second. Anytime you are making any sort of dough and you add liquid into flour, sometimes it needs like a minute or so to really soak it all up. So don't ever add extra liquid until you've given it time to hydrate. Steadily mix this up and make sure that there are no like pockets of dried flour on the bottom of your bowl or anything, and then scrape the sides down so that your dough is all together, because if you've got any smeared on the side of your bowl, it's just gonna dry and be a pain in the butt to wash off. All right, that's it, and I'm not joking. At this point, what we want to do is cover this bowl. You can use plastic wrap. I always just get a towel damp and kind of wrap the bowl up in it. And we want to leave this sitting on the counter or in a warm spot. 75 degrees is ideal. Like my house is not 75 degrees right now, but I do have my oven going, and so kind of directly in front of the oven is probably the warmest spot in my whole house right now. So that's where I will typically put a dough bowl to rise. But we want to let it sit out for 2 hours. And at that point, you could just bake it. I've got another batch of dough that I'm going to show you the next steps. But if you put this in the refrigerator for a minimum of 8 hours up to 48 hours, maybe even a little more that you can push it. 48 hours is about as long as I've ever gone. That is going to develop the flavor. I do that with sourdough also, just kind of let it have a very, very, very slow rise in the fridge, because the cold is obviously keeping it from leavening the dough in a fast pace. But that's where you get the really more complex flavors, and it's going to give you the texture that's more similar to sourdough with the big air bubbles and stuff like that if you do like slow rise this. In a pinch, if you just need bread after a 2-hour rise on the counter, you can totally go ahead and bake it at that point. And it will be good bread. I mean, like fresh out of the oven, slather some, you know, butter on there to melt, some jam. It's gonna be great. It's just not gonna be as complex as it could be if you did the slow rise. So I'm gonna set this over to rise. And here I have a batch of dough that I actually prepared last night. It spent the night in the fridge, about an hour or so. I pulled it out, and we wanna just kind of let it warm up a little bit so that it's not so cold. And this is what it looks like after the 2-hour rise on the counter and then overnight and into the morning in the refrigerator. You can see all the bubbles in there. It's got a kind of more punchy fragrance. It smells really good. So start by preheating your oven for 450 degrees. Now you have two options here. If you are going to use a Dutch oven, when you start the preheat, go ahead and put that Dutch oven in there because we want to preheat it as well. If you don't have a Dutch oven, I do think it is ideal to use one, but you can kind of mimic the effect of that by preheating your oven and putting a pan of water on the bottom shelf of your oven, and then you're going to put like a baking sheet with your dough on top of that on the shelf above it, and that pan of water, let's say like 2 to 3 cups of water to start. When you put your dough in, you can look and make sure your levels are good, but it's going to create steam, which is going to create that effect in the oven so that you get a great crust. With the Dutch oven, it just makes it easier because it's trapping the moisture of the loaf in there, and that's going to help make the crust. All right, I had to go hunt down this board. My husband borrows it from me to build Legos on. All right, so first things first, we want to put as little flour on our surface as we can get away with, like a tablespoon, and spread it nice and thin. Normally, I am extremely liberal in flouring my surface, but this dough particularly, it gets its great texture from the high hydration, the fact that it's so wet and sticky. And if you put a ton of flour on your surface and you mix that in, you're going to lose that. Two things that you don't have to have for this, but definitely make it easier because this dough is not kneadable. It is super sticky. It's super wet. Is a bench scraper and a bowl scraper. If you don't have that and you have to touch this with your hands and form it with your hands, put a little bit of oil on your hands, and that will help this not stick. We're going to scrape this super bubbly dough out onto the flour, and we are going to do our best to shape this roughly. It doesn't need to be perfect. If you don't know this, when you are making bread and you have any dirty dishes that have any flour water mixture on them, any dough on them, wash those as soon as possible, letting that dry. Later you will not thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to take this, kind of turn it over on itself, try to get sort of a smooth side here. It's not going to be perfect. Not bad though. And then we need a piece of parchment paper, and we're going to take this dough and kind of just plop it onto here the best we can. There we go. And now I'm going to get my heated Dutch oven out of the oven. If you're not using the Dutch oven, just take this paper, put it on the baking sheet, and put it in there in that oven that you've already preheated and got nice and steamy. Be careful. Obviously this is hot. You see all the steam coming out of there? When we put this wet dough in this really steamy Dutch oven and put the lid on and put it in the very hot oven, it's going to create a lot of steam in here and create the best crust. All right, lid goes back on, and we're gonna bake this in this 450 degree oven for 30 minutes with the lid on. So go ahead and set that first timer, and when the timer goes off, we're gonna take the lid off and we're gonna cook it for about 12 more minutes. That may give or take a couple minutes depending on your oven. You can temp the bread to make sure it's at least 205 degrees inside, and that tells you that it's fully baked and you're gonna cut into a doughy loaf. All right, let me stick this back in. 30-minute timer started. All right, timer just went off. Y'all don't look at my dirty oven. Look at that. All right, lid comes off. 12 more minutes. All right, my timer just went off. I'm gonna temp this bread. Lovely. I'm guessing this is done. It looks done, but better safe than sorry. Let's go ahead and stick the temp in. Okay, slow rise at the end, but we're up to 205. Now, normally I would put this on like a wire cooling rack and let it cool. My children can smell this and they're hovering, and I'm gonna let them eat this loaf now. And then I've got the other loaf that we just mixed together that I will make and save for the weekend. Let's take this out. Okay, here's the bottom, there's the top. Now this is the part that's gonna sell it, and you guys are gonna go and make this video. Unfortunately, my gloves are looking pretty manky, but okay. Pretty dang good, huh? All right, now do as I say and not as I do, okay? Your bread lasts longer if you wait till it cools to cut into it, because when all the steam escapes, it is going to let out moisture that would otherwise have stayed in and reincorporated, and so it goes stale faster. But if you want to eat hot bread, you gotta cut it That just means you gotta eat it fast enough that it doesn't go bad. It's so steamy. Now, there we have this. You can see the holes in the pockets. This looks a little gummy because I did cut it so steamy, but I want you to really see the texture that we have. Big holes. Oh, it's so good. It's very hot. Are y'all excited to try this? Ezra, you want to step in, brother?
Yes, I am excited to try this.
Nice, warm, fresh bread. How's the house smell right now?
Amazing.
Amazing.
I sniffed it out from our room.
Taste test. I'm gonna get you all in. What do we think? Should they make it? Oh, we've got butter dripping. Should they make it?
Yeah, you should make it.
So good, huh?
Mm-hmm. Really hot.
Yeah. All right, guys. I hope you guys will try this amazing loaf of crusty bread. So easy. Nothing to be intimidated about. Thank you for hanging out with us today.
Be blessed. Until next time.
All your mouths are so full.